Hello and welcome to the next video in this series on health, disease and medicines. What we're going to be talking about in this video is probably what I think one of the most amazing things that nature has created, which is the immune system. It is quite honestly phenomenal at what it does, and when you start learning about some of the numbers involved, it's quite crazy that it does even work. But it is, as I've said, absolutely fantastic. So what we're going to talk about in this video is we're going to talk about what the function of the immune system is. We're going to talk about how it responds to infection, and we're also going to talk about how immunizations help the body fight off infections. Now, before we start talking about the function of the immune system, there's a couple of key terms that we need to talk about. I've already said I'm not much of an artist, but we are going to have a bit of a story going on this side of our little slide as we go through. So first off, let's introduce our pathogen. Our pathogen is going to be a rod-shaped bacteria, and it's going to have some molecules on the outside of it. Now, these are slightly blown up out of proportion, they're slightly larger than they would be, but there are these structures around this cell. Now, interestingly, these structures, these little molecules, are found on every single cell and virus. What are they? Well, these are molecules called antigens. Okay, antigens. This is an important word. Now, what is an antigen? Well, an antigen is a molecule that is essentially like the passport of that cell. Here we go, that's its passport. Okay, now why am I saying it's like a passport? Well, all of the cells that are from your body will have one type of antigen. So your white blood cells and your immune system can basically go around and touch and feel all the cells in your body and identify whether they are from you or not. Now, a pathogen coming into your body is going to be from outside your body. Okay, it's going to be a foreign cell, that's what they're called. Now, your white blood cells can identify the fact that they're a foreign body by the fact that their antigens are different. Okay, so that antigen is the passport of a cell. Now, the next thing I'm going to introduce is I'm going to introduce sort of our heroes of the immune system. So what we're going to have here is we're going to have another cell. Okay, and this is our white blood cell. This has got something else around the outside of it, another molecule. And this is a molecule that will be specific to the antigen of this pathogen. Okay, and this has also got an important name that you need to remember. Antibody. Okay, so we've got this pathogen, okay, that has these antigens around the outside of cells. Now, antigens are around every single cell, okay, but the ones from on the pathogen will be different to the usual ones in your body. And the white blood cells, okay, this white blood cell here, okay, so this is a white blood cell, which is also called a lymphocyte. Blood cell. Okay, has those antibodies around the outside that are specific to that antigen, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. Right, so we've got these pathogens that have somehow managed to get into our bodies. They've got past all the physical and chemical barriers, and they're now trying to infect us. This is where our immune system is now going to get involved. Okay, so we've already talked about here the name of this white blood cell called a lymphocyte. But what happens? Okay, well, this is where it gets really fascinating. There will be somewhere in your body a white blood cell that has an antibody specific to the antigen of the pathogen. Okay, so we have this particular lymphocyte. Now, what that lymphocyte will do is when it finds the pathogen, it will link onto it. So here's our pathogen. It'll link on to an antigen, okay, on our bacteria. Okay, I'm just going to draw some lines on the outside of it to show the other ones. Once the lymphocyte has attached to the antigen on the pathogen, we say that the lymphocyte becomes activated. Well, what happens now that it's activated is this lymphocyte starts to divide. So lots of division occurs. So our lymphocyte suddenly starts producing lots of itself. So we end up with loads of lymphocytes. Now bear in mind they've all got antibodies on the outside of them. Okay, so they're all loads of antibodies, all on the outside of all of those lymphocytes. So what that means, it means that suddenly our pathogen, okay, is getting overwhelmed by the number of lymphocytes. Okay, we've got this idea that a pathogen has linked on to the antibody on the outside of one of these lymphocytes. Now, one of the things we've got to remember about the immune system is the immune system is made up of all sorts of different white blood cells, different lymphocytes, phagocytes. There are lots of different kinds of cells that I'm not going to go into detail in this video. So what we're looking at in sort of focus on this is a lymphocyte that produces antibodies. Now that lymphocyte had those antibodies on the outside of its cell, but it can also produce them on its inside. And there are some that will just secrete them out. So what we've got is we've now got this scenario where the pathogen that's infected our body not only has these lymphocytes looking for it, but there's all of these antibodies just flooded out into the bloodstream. So what does this all mean? Well, the antibodies will attach to the antigens Okay, so what? Well, what will happen is this may cause the pathogen to break down. Or it might essentially just be a big flag saying pathogens over here, rest of the immune system, and it can mark them for attack from other white blood cells. WBC there standing for white blood cells. Okay, so what we've talked about there is we've talked about the immune system, we've talked about the antigens, we've talked about antibodies, we've talked about the lymphocytes becoming activated, and we've been talking about the division. So what happens now? You've been infected by this pathogen, your immune system has defeated the pathogen. What next? Let's have a little chat about what happens when you get reinfected with the same pathogen. So picture the scenario, you're at school or work and you get ill because somebody brings a cold into work. You end up being pretty sick for 3 to 4 days, but then you go back to school. And still within that environment of school or work, people are still ill. And you get reinfected with that pathogen. What happens then? Do you feel ill for 3 to 4 more days? More likely you don't. You probably just feel a bit rubbish for 12 hours, maybe even a day. Or you might not even get ill at all. Now, why is that? Well, that's because of these memory lymphocytes. So let's say we've got this little graph here that's appeared. We've got the number of antibodies up one side and we've got the time in days down the bottom. So usually your body has a small number of antibodies in it at any one time. Okay, so here we are, we've got the small number of antibodies make that line a little bit thicker in our body. Now let's say we have an event, okay, and the event is at this point here, which is where we're going to get an infection, okay? So here we are infected for the first time, okay? So that's our point of infection. So at this point here, what's going to happen is our pathogen's going to get quite a lot of free rein, okay? Your body's not going to be instantly very quick at responding to it. Now there's two immune systems. There's the non-specific immune system and there's the specific immune system. Now, what we're talking about in this video is the specific immune system. This is not stuff you need to know for GCSE, but it's just useful because your body's always going to be trying to fight off these invaders. This is just what we call a specific response. So these antibodies are going to be low, and then what's going to happen is that lymphocyte is going to start to be activated. And you're going to get a little peak in the number of antibodies in your body. It's going to wait until the pathogen is defeated and gone from your system, and then the numbers will trail off again. Okay, so that could take 3 to 4 days, a week, could take even longer in some cases. So then we've got sort of this space of days whereby you're fine, you're completely well, and then you get reintroduced to the pathogen for a second time. Okay, now the main thing is here, this is the same pathogen. If it was something different, we'd have this response again. Okay, so on this second time we get infected, what happens is almost immediately there will be a spike in the number of antibodies being produced, and then it will start to tail off. Okay, so this is what we call a secondary immune response. What's this one called, I hear you say? Well, this here is called a primary immune response. And over here, this is our secondary immune response. So what you can see is that once you're exposed to the same pathogen again, you will get a much faster and much greater response. Okay, but as a note, this is only for the same pathogen only. Now, I say that because if it was a different pathogen, you would end up getting a primary immune response. You don't have the memory lymphocytes to have that secondary immune response. How long do those memory lymphocytes last for? It varies. Sometimes it can be a couple of years, sometimes it can be even longer. So how can we actually use this to our advantage? So science developed vaccines. Now, what is a vaccine? This is the last thing we're going to talk about in this video. Okay, so we have this concept of vaccinations. Now, what is a vaccination? Well, vaccinations provide you with an immune response towards certain pathogens. Now, how do we get that? Well, what a vaccine is it contains dead or inactive pathogens. Now, what that means is, let's say we've got the flu jab, okay? They can isolate the flu, or the microorganism that causes the flu, the virus that causes the flu. And what they will do is they'll basically remove the genetic DNA from it, so it will be the protein coat, and it will have the antigens around the outside. Now, when that gets put in somebody's body through a vaccine, what will happen is your body will have a primary immune response to it. Okay, so you'll basically have a little bit of a response to that pathogen. Now, what that means is it means that when you get infected with the actual pathogen, you will get a secondary immune response rather than the primary immune response. So it will essentially lower the symptoms and may even make it so that you don't get any symptoms at all. So if you get the flu jab, you are much, much less likely to get the flu, because whenever you get infected with the flu, your body's like, I've seen this antigen, and it has a massive secondary immune response straight away. Okay, so vaccinations, what do? Well, they contain dead or inactive pathogens, which means that they create memory cells for that pathogen. Okay, so therefore you will get a secondary immune response when you're exposed to that pathogen. Okay, so let's do a brief little summary. This is a long video. Okay, we've talked about the immune system. The immune system is a big old beast. It's an incredible thing. So the function of the immune system is to protect you against pathogens after they've somehow managed to get through those chemical and physical barriers of your body. What happens is when we've got that antigen come into our body, those antigens around the pathogen are identified by white blood cells as, hang on, you're not from around here. And what will happen is your immune system will start to attack those pathogens. Now, when one of these lymphocytes with an antibody links onto the pathogen, they will become activated and they will start to divide an awful lot. Okay, they'll produce identical copies of themselves. What they'll do is they'll produce tons and tons of antibodies, and those antibodies can do a number of different things. They could cause the pathogen to break down, but they could also be like a flag marker to say, over here, here's the bad guys we've got to get rid of. After that primary infection, those lymphocytes will start to sort of die off, but some of them will hang around, okay, and they will become memory lymphocytes, and they will prepare the body for a secondary immune response in case you get infected with the same pathogen. It's really important. This is a specific process. Okay, so if you got infected by something else, you would end up having the primary immune response again. Last but by no means least, we just talked about a vaccine. Okay, vaccines contain dead or inactive pathogens, so therefore they contain the antigens of those dead or inactive pathogens, which means that you get a primary immune response and therefore create memory cells so that when you're infected with the actual pathogen, you get a secondary immune response. So hopefully that's been an interesting video, topical at the time of me making this video, but thank you very much for sticking with it and listening through it. I hope it's been useful. Please give the video a like, share the video, share the channel, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, all of that awesome stuff. So, as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.